Welcome to Sound Bites from Overeaters Anonymous. Our show will educate you about OA's 12-step program so you recognize the symptoms of compulsive eating and find the support you need in a program that works to help you control your eating behaviors and maintain a healthy weight. In this next hour, you will realize you're not alone and that there is hope for recovery and a whole new life free of obsession with food and weight. Now, here is your host, Naomi Lippel.
Good afternoon and welcome to Soundbites from Overeaters Anonymous, a 12-step solution to compulsive eating. I'm Naomi Lippel, Managing Director of Overeaters Anonymous, also known as OA. Our 13-week series, which runs through January 9th, will give you information on what OA is about and how it works, so you can decide if it might be right for you. On today's episode, we're going to talk about how and why a 12-step program can work for compulsive eating issues. So what is a 12-step program? Most everyone you talk to will say they've heard of Alcoholics Anonymous, AA, and they might even know that it uses some 12 mysterious steps. Well, OA uses the same basic 12 steps as AA, but adapted for compulsive eaters. In step 1, we talk about being powerless over food instead of alcohol. In steps 2 and 3, we acknowledge that all of our attempts to control our eating have ended in failure and made us more desperate and crazy than ever. What we needed to do was not summon up more willpower or try harder, but instead surrender, admit that we couldn't do it on our own. We needed a power greater than ourselves, greater than our compulsion to eat and our obsession with food, diets, and weight. When we acknowledged that, we could turn our eating and our lives over to that power, whatever or whoever that power is for us individually. We stopped trying to control our eating and found that we were now able to eat normally, for a while. But if we didn't change our way of dealing with our lives and our problems, our habits and self-defeating patterns, we would go back to doing what we'd always done, eat compulsively. Steps 4 through 9 lead us through a process of self-reflection to see what isn't working in our ways of dealing with the world. We look closely at our fears and our resentments, and we discover the things in us that keep us apart from others, our selfishness, our fears, our secrets, our dishonesty. We share that with another person, someone we trust, and identify the things we do that just don't serve us. We look at where and how we've harmed others and ourselves and try to make things right. Step 10 continues this process on a daily basis, and Step 11 allows us to further develop the relationship with the power that keeps us abstinent from compulsive eating and in recovery. Finally, in Step 12, we continue to practice these steps in every aspect of our lives and share the message of recovery to other compulsive eaters. As long as we do that, we no longer want or need to eat compulsively. So joining us today are Dr. Marty Lerner, a psychologist who runs an eating disorder center in Florida, and 3 guests from OA who will share how OA's 12-step program worked differently for them than all the other things they've tried in the past to lose weight. Since anonymity is an important principle of our program, we'll only be using OA members' first names. And I think I said 3 guests, but it's actually 2 guests. So we're going to begin with OA member Meg from Minnesota. Meg, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hi.
Hi, welcome. So you're maintaining a 90-pound weight loss for the past 7 years, is that right?
Yes.
That's incredible. So tell me about your obsession with food. When did it start?
Well, I really believe I was born out of the chute with a problem with food, but I can go back to memories of age 3 and 4. I remember when I was 4 years old, I ate a bottle of aspirin, and in those days they had 100 count. And the thing that made it different was I was looking for that orange fizzy taste and sensation. And my mom was asleep. I knew it was medicine. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I needed to have that exciting food experience. So, of course, that resulted in a trip to the hospital, and since I'm here, it didn't kill me, nor did my mom. And then in the 7th grade, I remember eating half of a full sheet cake in 20 minutes because my sister was sharing it with neighbors. And then I ate dinner after that with no problem. So I've always been active and always had a normal weight until I became a young adult, and that's when the weight started coming on. So that's, too, when I really got involved in the diets and exercising and still just always focusing on the food, and always knew that I could eat more than anyone, whether it was a kid or an adult.
Wow. Was that something you felt kind of proud of for a while?
No, in fact, in some moments I did, and especially when I was thin. But a lot of times I really felt ashamed about it, and I would eat my volume food in private.
And did you have that experience of trying lots of different diets and techniques to manage your weight and then gaining the weight back and maybe even that kind of yo-yo experience?
Yeah, I started my first diet when I was 16, and of course I was working at a bakery. I mean, the whole thing I just laugh about now. And when I was on my dieting phase, I was fine. I didn't eat anything because then I do the starving thing, and then I started smoking so I could curb my appetite. And then when I wasn't dieting, then I could eat, several dozen donuts during my night shift because I frosted them. So I had an intimate relationship with all of them.
What is it in the 12 steps that's really different from how you approached this problem before?
I would say for me, it's really the spiritual aspect. When I did a lot of commercial weight loss diets and combinations of my own, and it was always a focus on I'm in control of my weight and I'm in control of my behaviors. And what I also realized after becoming a part of OA is that, of course, I have no willpower and I just don't have a stop button on my eating, and that I just needed to stay away. And the diet mentality was always a temporary fix, so that as soon as I was done with my diet, I could go back to the way I was. And, of course, I just kept repeating the same cycle over and over again. I'd lose my weight, stay for a little while, eat the way I used to, and gain weight and even more.
Right. So was there one particular step that you heard in the program early on that, had an immediate impact on you?
I think step one for me, my parents belonged to another 12-step program, and I just learned from that one was too many and a million was not enough. And so by the time I walked into OA the first time in 1995, I really got the fact that I had a problem with sugar. Sugar's my main addiction, and that it had nothing to do with was I smart enough, pretty enough, active enough, good enough, whatever. It's just that my body just doesn't produce it like normal eaters.
And step one is admitting that you're powerless and over
Absolutely,
food.
yes.
Yeah. And did you feel, the other part of step one is our lives had become unmanageable. By the time you got to OA, did you feel like that?
Very much so. In fact, the night before I went to my first meeting, I ate a bowl of brown sugar, and it still makes my teeth kind of shiver just thinking about it. Wow. And I just somehow knew I was going to have to give that up. But I just knew that I was tired of the rage, the anger, the complaining, the low self-esteem, and just the remorse that I had every time I overate.
Yeah, interesting. So you've maintained your weight loss for 7 years. A lot of people we talked about struggle with losing it and gaining it back and more. So how has the 12-step program helped you to maintain your weight, a healthy weight, for a long period of time?
I really look at the 12 steps as my guide for living. And it isn't just step one. And I'm a two-timer in OA. I was in OA for 5 years, from 85 to 90, thought I could do it on my own, got complacent, and gained back all my weight and more. And then was in 14 years of, again, the dieting, the exercising, the smoking, the everything else, and reaching bottom yet again of just feeling that I know I cannot control this. So that by the time I came back, in 2004, I was ready to put the food down and really look at the fact that this is my life. If I want to have a good and happy and fulfilling life, I want to follow these steps. And it really gave me the guide of, yes, admitting I'm powerless. Yes, I was nuts when I was in the food, angry, rageful, et cetera, and the fact that there were behaviors that I had when I didn't treat people well, and I harmed people. And so that there's a whole guideline for me to really I can't fix, I can't go back and redo everything, but I can make amends and make restitution for my wrongs instead of beating myself up for it and then using food as my solution to feel better. Yeah, I might feel better for that 5 minutes as I'm scarfing it down, but the remorse and the regret I had afterwards is just enormous.
Right.
And
so then you would have the thing that you did to harm someone plus the remorse and the regret over having eaten over it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then I just stayed in the cycle. And this way, I mean, for me, the one obvious thing was there's certain foods I cannot eat anymore. Sugar, fried foods, junk food, that sort of thing. And I don't feel bad about it. I mean, I have so many blessings in life. I can hear, I can see, I don't have cancer, I have great health. And so I can't eat a cookie, big deal. So that's how I look at it, too. I don't look at it that I'm doing without. I look at what I have going forward.
That's a really great distinction to make. From your experience, what does emotional recovery have to do with weight and eating issues? And how does the 12-step approach help you with that?
Well, it's really, for part of it is really about growing up, suiting up. When we talk about step 4 and making our inventory, and it's really just taking a true assessment of, who we've been, who we are, and then what we want to go looking forward. But the fact is, I'm a 50-plus-year-old woman, and it's not appropriate for me to act like I'm 8 years old. And there were times I would, especially if I didn't get my food or when I felt remorse and all those things. But the emotional maturity is really about getting out of that everything is all about me, is really having that self-focused, almost narcissistic view of everything is about me, or everyone's talking about me, or everyone thinks this about me, etc. And this is really about what is my purpose in life, and how am I with my friends and my fellows and my coworkers and colleagues, etc., that I look beyond that, and then therefore by putting the food down and working the steps, I'm going to have a more emotional well-being, and I'm going to be more balanced. I'm not going to be raging. I'm going to be more kind and loving and a little bit more carefree.
Interesting. So you said something earlier about spiritual life and spiritual recovery. We're going to take a break in a minute, but when we come back, I'd like to talk to that experience a little bit. So it's time for us to take a short break, and thank you so much, Meg, for sharing your experience with us. This is Sound Bites from Overeaters Anonymous on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel. Stay tuned.
I didn't know what to do about it.
I tried counting calories, I took pills, eating, and then more eating.
I really wanted to stop, but nothing could make me stop.
At one point, it was so bad that I just felt like giving up.
I felt so alone.
Like nobody else could possibly understand.
We understand. We're Overeaters Anonymous, and we have helped thousands of people just like you. People who want to stop their compulsive eating and start living a healthy, rewarding life.
Overeaters Anonymous. Help me get my life back.
Now I eat in a way that's healthy and good for me.
I never realized what I was missing out on.
With OA, I am living again and loving it.
Start living the life you deserve with help from Overeaters Anonymous. Find us on the web at oa.org.
Welcome back to Sound Bites from Overeaters Anonymous. We're talking with Meg about how OA's 12-step program helped her. So before the break, Meg, we were talking about the spiritual recovery, that aspect of the program for you. So what does that have to do with weight and eating issues?
The spiritual focus for me is just really understanding that there's a universal energy out there, that I don't have to do everything myself. And a lot of times that's what I believe to be. I was raised in an organized religion, and I'm very thankful for that. But OA and following the spiritual program has offered me so much more. And I see how other people interpret that and that they can recover. So there's nothing hard and fast, or anybody has to follow certain rules. And so for me, I've been able to work more time into prayer and meditation, where I'm able to ask my higher power for something and then also listen for what are my next steps. And it's really focusing on being my best self and what is my purpose in this life.
Mm-hmm. So when you say in the step it says God as we understood him, so what does that mean to you, or how did that change for you in the steps or in the program?
It became more expansive for me in the sense that I just think that there's a collective spiritual guidance in the universe. And so it isn't just, I look at one person with all the answers or one entity. I pray to a lot of people, and I am more connected with, I would say, nature and those sorts of things. And then also what other people, when I go to my meetings and talk to my sponsor, which is like a mentor, have to say, and I get my answers that way. I get my answers through life and blood people as well.
And how does that help you with your compulsive eating, with maintaining your healthy weight, maintaining your abstinence on a day-to-day basis? How does that help you?
It helps me just focus on what is my purpose in life and what is it that I need to do to live my best self. And sometimes that's stepping out and doing something scary when really it's for my best self, instead of sitting in a job where I'm underemployed and underappreciated and feeling, oh, woe is me. This way I'm really utilizing my gifts and talents. And then as a result, I feel more lighthearted and free. And as a result, more people want to spend time with me because I'm happy, and now I'm happy to even share that I'm happy. I don't have to feel kind of silly about it. I just think it's great, and that I love my life as it is right now. It's just so much more than I ever imagined, and I'm doing it with others. I don't have to do it alone, and I think for so long I felt trapped that I had to come up with all the answers and then would get angry because I didn't have all the answers. And working the spiritual program in OA, we are encouraged always to lean on a higher power and to lean on our fellows, and that's accepted.
Yeah, that's great. Well, congratulations, Meg, for the work you've done on yourself and on your life.
Thank you.
And, just making an incredible life for yourself. I know that takes commitment, and you've done it. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you.
Now, I'd like to welcome Neil from Maryland to the show to talk about his recovery in OA. Hi, Neil. Are you there?
I am. Hi, Naomi.
Great. Welcome. So you've been maintaining a 35-pound weight loss for the past 16 years. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So why did you end up turning to OA? What led you to this path?
Well, it was interesting listening to Meg because I have always felt that the origins of my disease are emotional, and while I was attracted to sweet foods very early in my life and ate them to excess, I was a kind of kid that was very nervous and anxious, kind of the classic ADD kid. Mm-hmm. And there was something about having these very large feelings inside of my little body that made me very protective, I was aggressive, I was kind of defiant, I just kind of felt like life wasn't fair. And I just had a chip on my shoulder, and what happened for me is I just felt like living life with those big feelings was very uncomfortable, and I started to look for relief very early. And for me, oftentimes I'd be camped out in front of the TV with, a particular food, sweet food, some other kind of food. I was just out of touch. I was killing time. I was dropping out. That was really what my purpose was. And in a lot of ways, this kind of mistaken belief that the world owed me a living and I could just come and go as I pleased is how I conducted myself. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't so much about over binging, but it really was about making an association. There was a pleasing taste that was associated with these periods of what you might call relaxation, or at least just kind of stasis. And unfortunately, it became a dependency. To the extent that I could use food to zone out, I stopped trying to cope with anything that bothered me, and it really held me back. Emotionally, I was very immature and contentious and defiant, and at the same time, kind of lazy, because I just felt like life was hard for me, and if your life was like mine, you'd do the same thing too. So that's a kind of an emotional illness. I was ill at ease. And where I sought relief with food, I continued to seek relief from other things, like exercise. I did not get obese for my disease. What I did was I relied on exercise to control my weight, and also having a lot of pent-up aggression and frustration. I was fairly gifted as an athlete, and I loved to compete. But I used it to kind of dominate other people. It was an area where I thrived, where in other areas of life I felt I was kind of behind the curve, like in school, where I felt like my ADD was that deficit really kind of hurt me, made me feel inadequate. Well, in sports, I was one of the first guys that got chosen, and I always took great pride in that, and, I would just play hard. Unfortunately, at the age of 35, when you're playing softball and you're willing to still have a fist fight with somebody over a foul ball, it does have a way of running its course. So
kind of makes you wonder what was going on there, huh?
Yeah. So for me, as I say, I would do things like repetitive gaming. When computer games came out, I could just, peer into the computer until I was just numb. I used to read, used to play endless games of solitaire. So that kind of repetitive gaming was just another way to numb out. And that's really what my life in addiction was about. It was about running away from pain and running to what I considered to be pleasure, but it was really just relief, and unfortunately seeking relief from things that were never really designed to give me that.
And what was it in the 12 steps when you got to OA that was different from how you approached your problems before? Like, why do you think that worked for you?
There was a combination of, first just coming into meetings and hearing people talk with great facility and in a kind of a casual, authentic way about dealing with aspects of their disease that I currently was, involved with, and just seeing how far that they'd come, I was immediately attracted to that. You hear people say, I came to a meeting and I felt like I was home. I could really identify. In the past, I would compare myself to people, and it was usually an unfavorable comparison, and that set up that antipathy, like I can't tell people what I'm really about because they'll think less of me. Well, in a meeting, everybody was the same, everybody had value, and there were people who were overcoming the problem that I had, and I was attracted to that, and I began to ask people, of course, when you take the first step, you have to admit that you have a problem. They say that you have to hit bottom. And that's really true, because I think that in order to take the steps in sequence, you have to build on a strong foundation. And for me, I had to really understand that I was not successful at reversing my addictive eating on my own. Yeah. And there were people there who, if I was willing to ask for help, they were willing to help me, and then I had to really make a decision to receive that. And once I started to do that, my life started to get better.
Was there one step in particular that really resonated with you at the beginning?
Around steps 2 and 3, when, step 2, it says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, which really, it means that a precondition of taking this step is you have to admit that you're insane. And, the jig was kind of up. I was, in many ways, highly emotional. Things like road rage I could always relate to. I was very impulsive and overreactive. And while I wasn't necessarily like getting checked into the rubber room, I was constantly expending a lot of energy trying to deal with frustration and resentment. And I found when I came into program that to develop an understanding of a higher power that was really kind of a higher order of intelligence, kind of a benevolent resource that had my best interests at heart and would put me into situations where I could learn and grow, that was a big turning point for me. because in the past I thought adversity was evidence that I was not good, that I was not a good person, that I didn't have worth, and I was being punished for it. And I found that when I got abstinent and I was able to string days of refraining from compulsive eating together, it all turned around, and I was able to see kind of a greater purpose. It enabled me to step back and certainly see my own actions more objectively, and I was able to see when there was a problem in relationships, that there were things that I was doing that contributed to that, whereas before I wasn't even really willing to do that.
Yeah. Neil, we're going to have to take a quick break.
Great.
And we'll be back shortly. You're listening to Soundbites from Overeaters Anonymous on Voice America, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Neil about his experience using OA's 12-step program to deal with his eating issues. Welcome back, Neil.
Hi.
So let's see. You were talking about your relationships with other people and how that was affected in the program. Did you find that changing slowly over time, or was there kind of an immediate transformation for you?
I think it was gradual. You know, I began to see that really that a lot of my disappointment in life came from wanting to be well-liked and wanting to be, loved and to be able to love other people, and I felt like I was doing kind of a bad job of it. By the time I got into program and I saw how selfless people were, and people would say things like, in order to keep the gift of abstinence, you had to give away what you got, and it just made it very altruistic. To give unconditionally was something that was very hard for me. And then I saw that I was capable of that, and that it says in the literature that when you are feeling the stress that might have previously brought on compulsive eating, that you help somebody else, that you get outside of yourself. And so, in OA we have tools like making phone calls and reaching out to people, and I began to go to meetings and I'd hear someone tell a story. They had a test coming up, or they had a medical thing that they had to go through, and I would just take down names and numbers and say, on that day I'm going to call them up and say, I was thinking about you because I remembered you talked about this. And just having people say after the fact that getting that call or, extending one's hand at that particular point in time really made a difference in their life.
And how did that make a difference in your life?
It was a profound thing for me to realize that we do deeply affect each other, whether we know it or not.
And how did that help you in your life when you would reach out to people that way? Like if you were let's say being triggered by a thought or a particular food or, a situation that in the past you might have eaten over?
Well, I felt that kind of transparency, that I could talk about my process and just say that I was having a difficult time. In the past, showing my vulnerabilities really didn't seem cool, and not that I did it for effect, but I found that when I was in trouble and I was able to share honestly about going through a hard time and not picking up the first compulsive bite, that could be an inspirational message for someone who hadn't yet developed the tools that they needed to sustain abstinence. So there was a purpose, there was a purpose in having the pain, there was a purpose in adversity, even in suffering. I felt that sometimes I had to overcome the mistaken belief that I had to see things in a certain way. And an addict that feels like they don't have choices is going to act out, compulsively, self-destructively. And when I would tap into that spiritual energy that I felt in program, I would be given inspirational thoughts and new ideas, or even just come up with, I could call so-and-so and talk to them about this particular situation. And it
sounds like you had choices where you didn't feel you had choices before.
Exactly.
The program actually provides that.
Yes, and that, this is where we get the power back that we lost in step one. I don't know that I put a lot of structure into my food plan. I eat measured amounts. I have a lot of structure, and it helps me because I see that we all need limits. and that just as a corral keeps a horse from getting out, it keeps opposing predators from getting in.
Yeah.
And so I felt that the boundaries around my food were helping contain what was otherwise a difficult situation for me.
That's a great analogy. What's your life like now since being in program and being abstinent?
Well, it's very full. I'm very devoted to my OA recovery. I'm active in different service positions that enable me to be in touch and make a difference in my local area. I'm married to the same woman who happens to be in program as well for the last 26 years. I've learned to run a business fairly successfully for quite a long time. So there's a constancy. Program kind of allows a person to recalibrate their moral compass and live a life that has ups and downs, and it's all okay.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Neil. I really appreciate you taking the time to do that today. Okay, our last guest on today's show is Dr. Marty Lerner, who runs an eating disorder clinic in Florida. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Lerner.
Glad to be here.
Okay, well, some people are overweight, or they have an unhealthy or unbalanced diet, or maybe they need to incorporate more movement into their life. But others seem to have a problem with food and eating that goes way beyond that. So for people listening to this show and wondering if OA might be a good direction for them, how would they know?
Well, to begin with, I think there's a lot of misinterpretation about the difference between a weight disorder and an eating disorder, much like there's the difference between a social drinker and an alcoholic. So you could take two people, for instance, who weigh the same, and one be a compulsive overeater or have an addictive relationship to food, and the other just having the symptom of being obese or overweight as a result of bad habits. So there's a difference between an addiction and an eating disorder and someone who has more of a lifestyle or issues with bad habits. Pretty much when we were listening to Neil and when listening to Meg, Neil did not have an issue with being massively overweight.
Right.
And what's interesting about that is that there's a misnomer in OA from people who are not members of OA that the most important criterion to define an eating disorder or food addiction or compulsive overeating is what somebody weighs, and that is probably the poorest measure with which to define an addictive relationship with food.
So what is a better measure for people?
Again, I'm going to draw the analogy to other addictions and our cousins in AA, but I would say that it's more a measure as to how the quality of someone's life and their functioning is affected by the relationship with food. So I would define alcoholism that way. It's not so much how much someone drinks or how frequently they drink, but what happens to them as a result of drinking.
Right. And so what is it about the 12-step approach that OA offers that might be more effective for people who eat compulsively, more effective than diets or other things they've tried in the past?
Well, understand there's a difference between a diet, which is usually temporary and treating a symptom, the weight, and a food plan, which is more lifelong and more permanent. And that said, OA becomes a way of life and seeks through the steps to remedy some of the root causes of an addictive relationship with food. And all addictions have something in common, and that is to fix feelings. So from a psychological standpoint, a food addiction, compulsive overeating, binge eating disorder, however you say it, it really is a disease that has a physical, emotional, and spiritual component to it, and basically OA affords a way to address all of those issues, whereas a diet is strictly focusing on manipulating your appearance and your body weight.
What kind of process have you seen your clients go through when they're in your facility and they're working on their recovery?
Usually they have one of two experiences. The ones that tend to succeed are the ones that utilize the tools in OA as a support network long after they leave a treatment experience. And those that don't do as well can't get beyond a dieting mentality. So they see a program of recovery as a support group for a food plan or a diet and measure the quality of their recovery in terms of pounds lost rather than go beyond what would be a first step and looking at, all the other components to the program, which in a roundabout way, you might say, have an influence over stabilizing a healthy body weight. So there's much more to an OA program or a 12-step program than simply treating a symptom.
And what about people who it just sounds like too much work for them? Like they just want to lose the weight, like all this 12 steps and spiritual recovery. It's too much work. Like, how do you answer that to them, for them?
Well, to be fair, there's a contingent of people that will do well with any of the popular diets. They're not food addicts. They're not people with an addictive relationship with food. But if you have an addictive relationship with any substance or compulsive behavior, usually a 12-step program is not the first place you seek help. It's the last place on the block. And addictions have a way of, as Neil put it, helping you to reach a bottom. And the irony is that the lower that bottom may be for someone, the more desperate someone is and the more open-minded they are. And so willingness becomes a product of how much pain you're in. And a compulsive overeater, or any addict for that matter, usually reaches a point where they're in so much pain that their mind opens, and I call it, and other people call it, a moment of clarity. There's an opportunity to open the mind to an approach that is different than the same old.
Yeah, very interesting. Great. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back and talk some more. And you're listening to Sound Bites from Overeaters Anonymous on the Voice America Health and Wellness channel. Stay with us. Welcome back to Sound Bites from Overeaters Anonymous. We're talking with Dr. Lerner about his experience with eating disorder clients at his Florida clinic. So, Dr. Lerner, it's common to hear OA members say they're one bite away from a binge. So it seems important to them that they don't get complacent and keep in contact with the 12 steps even after they've found recovery. Why do you think this is?
I think the best way to answer this is to just read, if you'll indulge me for a second. The American Psychiatric Association came up with, I think, a very succinct, albeit medical definition of addiction. And my assumption and my experience has been that compulsive overeating is a disease, and it's a disease of addiction. So I'm just going to take a moment and read you their statement in their task force as how do they define an addiction, and we can apply this to compulsive overeating. They say addiction is a primary chronic disease of brain reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry. By that, they're talking about the physical aspect of addiction. They go on to say that dysfunction in these circuits leads to characteristic biological, psychological, social, and spiritual manifestations. This is reflected in the individual pursuing reward and or relief by substance use or other behaviors. The addiction is characterized by impairment in behavioral control, craving, inability to consistently abstain, and diminished recognition of significant problems with one's behaviors and interpersonal relationships. And this becomes the most important paragraph in their statement. Like other chronic diseases, addiction involves cycles of relapse and remission. And this is where OA comes in. Without treatment or engagement in recovery activities, addiction is progressive and can result in disability or premature death.
Very interesting.
If you digest that, now this is an impartial a group of professionals, psychiatrists that specialize in treatment of addiction. This is what's being taught in medical schools today, which I think is a great advance. But what they're really endorsing as part of the treatment process is long-term, lifelong engagement in a recovery process with a group of like sufferers, people in recovery, which is an endorsement of a 12-step program. And if you have an addiction to food, it's an endorsement of a program like OA.
Yeah. Now, part of the 12-step process is making a list of people that you've harmed and then making amends, and also telling that, sharing that list with somebody who you trust. So why do you think this process is important in recovery?
It's an excellent question. Although we're taking a step out of the context of other steps, there's a psychological component and spiritual component to this step. And from my perspective, with working with people who have completed these steps, and in particular this step, there's a release from guilt, but there's also an emotional experience to this where a lot of compulsive overeating is in the service of trying to assuage or fix or cope with either resentment or anger or guilt. And this is sort of a house cleaning step, which takes a lot of the baggage with which people may be driven to overeat to be able to clear their end of the sidewalk rather than being victims or looking at what was done to them, but looking at what they may have transgressed to other people, and gives them kind of a clean slate so they don't have to keep reliving in the past and move towards, the future and the present.
Yeah. And when we talk about people recovering on 3 levels, physical, emotional, and spiritual, and we've talked a little bit about physical and emotional, why is it important to address eating issues from the spiritual aspect in particular?
Well, we've known for a long time that 12-step programs such as OA and AA have been able to do for people long-term what professionals have not. And part of what OA offers is a spiritual component. So there are lots of professionals that can offer a physical and emotional support, but combining all 3 is something unique to a 12-step program like OA. And lastly, the spiritual component, both Megan and Neil identified this. They kept using the word sense of purpose. And spiritual is another way of saying existential, which is another way of saying an identity or sense of purpose outside of the self. Most people that have addictions are kind of in this hell of self-absorption and self-focus. And part of a spiritual experience is being able to step outside of that and find some serenity or peace, because traveling in the neighborhood of your mind is always a rough neighborhood to spend too much time in.
Yeah, as we've heard. Well, tell me a little bit more about what you've seen with some of your clients.
Sure. I'm very privileged to work with people who have come to our treatment center and people like Neil and Meg, because in this business, it's difficult to see people get well and stay well. And I'm afforded an opportunity to see that. And what people will go through is quite a transformation, because when people come into a 12-step program or they come into rehab or treatment in order to benefit from a 12-step program, what you see in this transformation is a light bulb go off, a moment of clarity where they realize that the food and the weight was the symptom, not the problem, and that the key, the door to finding some peace of mind and as Meg was describing, this gratitude and this energy for life really comes from being able to move off of the addictive relationship with food and move into kind of this growing up process or this healing process that is a result of working all of these steps. And that is something that goes beyond words to explain, not to sound hokey, but for me it's a spiritual experience to see people transition into that and then pass that along to another person.
Yeah, it must be really gratifying.
Amazing. Oh, it's great. I mean, it's a privilege, and I get paid for it. Go figure.
Do you see that the process is really similar for people who sort of run the gamut in anorexia and bulimia and compulsive eating, or kind of go back and forth between those?
I think there's a thread between all of these, and I think part of the evolution of OA is that although in its origins it was looking at people that were compulsive overeaters and mostly by appearance might be overweight, we know today that compulsive overeating has synonyms such as food addiction, binge eating disorder, bulimia. It has a lot of different flavors, but it has one common thread. And the common thread is an addictive relationship to food and weight. And a 12-step program like OA offers a longer-term solution to a recovery process. Some people can enter that process through OA to begin with and to end with. Some people, just like people with alcohol and drug addictions, need some professional help to be able to benefit from a 12-step program. But in the end, it is a 12-step program and that support system which sustains recovery.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. I can't believe this hour has gone by already. It just flew by. So we're going to wrap up, and I'll just finish by saying if you've been struggling with your weight, with eating compulsively or another eating disorder, maybe you've tried everything, check out Overeaters Anonymous. It's a different approach than what you've done in the past, and it might just give you a whole new life. Go to our website at oa.org and find a meeting, or you can call us at 505-891-2664. Thanks again to OA members Meg and Neil for being on the show today and sharing their personal stories with us, and to Dr. Marty Lerner for sharing his insights with us too. Join us next week on Soundbites from Overeaters Anonymous for our episode on a plan of eating in OA and how it's different than a diet.